Hello boys and girls, welcome to Miss Winnie's Year 3 English classroom. Are you ready for today's lesson? Let's go! Now what are we going to learn today? By the end of the lesson, you will be able to look and write the time correctly based on the pictures given. Alright, before we start our lesson, let's listen to a song. What's the time, Mr. Clock?
What's the new surprise? Shapes in every size. Parts will come together to a new toy and a new adventure.
The clock is ticking, tick-tock. What's the time, Mr. Clock? The clock is ticking, tick-tock. What's the time, Mr. Clock? 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock, 4 o'clock, 5 o'clock, 6 o'clock. What's the time? The clock is ticking, tick-tock. What's the time, Mr. Clock? The clock is ticking, tick-tock. What's the time, Mr. Clock? 7 o'clock, 8 o'clock, 9 o'clock, 10 o'clock, 11 o'clock, 12 o'clock. What's the time, Mr. Clock?
So what do you say? You want to be the first to get our videos? Click here to subscribe. And if you want to see more videos, click here.
Okay, that's a very nice song, isn't it? To start off our lesson. So as we all know, today we're going to learn about how to read time and also to write time as well. So let's continue. Okay, so this is the clock. This is the face of the clock. And on the clock, we have two hands. One is the long hand. One is the short hand. Now, when the long hand is pointing to number 12, it means that it's something o'clock. Then we will have to look at where the shorthand is. So over here, the shorthand is pointing to number 1. So what's the time? Yes, it's 1 o'clock. What's the time? It's 1 o'clock. Good. Now let's have a look at the next one. Okay, now the long hand is pointing to number 12. So meaning it's something o'clock. Now let's look at the short hand. The short hand is pointing to the number 2. So what's the time? It's 2 o'clock. What's the time? It's 2 o'clock. Good. Next one. Alright, same thing. The long hand is pointing to the number 12, meaning it's something o'clock. Now let's have a look at the short hand. The short hand is pointing to number 3. So what's the time? It's 3 o'clock. What's the time? It's 3 o'clock. Good. Now what about this? The long hand is pointing to the number 12 and the short hand is pointing to number 4. So what's the time? It's 4 o'clock. What's the time? It's 4 o'clock. What about this one here? What's the time? Can you tell me what's the time? Look at the long hand. The long hand is pointing to number 12. Now look at the short hand. The short hand is pointing to number 5. Yes. So what's the time? It's 5 o'clock. What's the time? It's 5 o'clock. Good job. Okay, what about this time here? What's the time? Can you tell me? What's the time? Yes, it's 6 o'clock. It's 6 o'clock. Next one. What's the time? It's 7 o'clock. Next one. What's the time? The long hand is pointing to number 12 and the short hand is pointing to number 8. So what's the time? It's 8 o'clock. What's the time? It's 8 o'clock. Good job, children. You're doing really well. Now let's have a look at the time. What's the time? The long hand is pointing to number 12, meaning it's something o'clock. Then the short hand is pointing to number 9. So what time is it? It's 9 o'clock. Good. What's the time? It's 10 o'clock. Yes. What's the time? It's 11 o'clock. Good job. Next one. What's the time? Oh, look. The long hand and the short hand is pointing together at the number 12. So what's the time? It's 12 o'clock. Very, very good. Now let's look at the next time. Now the long hand now has changed its place. The long hand now is pointing to number 6. It's pointing to number 6. So when the long hand is pointing to number 6, meaning it's half past something. So you have to look at the short hand. The short hand is slightly past number 1. The short hand is slightly past 1. So what's the time? It's half past 1. What's the time? It's half past 1. Next. What's the time? Now the long hand is pointing to number 6. So meaning it's half past something. Let's look at the short hand. The short hand is slightly past 2. So meaning what's the time? It's half past 2. Good. Next one. What's the time? It's half past 3. Good job. Now look at this one here. What's the time? The long hand is pointing to number 6, meaning it's half past something. Okay, so the short hand is slightly past 7. So what's the time? It's half past 7. Good job. The next one. What's the time? Oh, look here. The short hand, the long hand is pointing to 6 and the short hand is slightly past 6. So what's the time? It's half past 6. Good job. Next one. Tell me what's the time? It's half past 4. Yes. Next one. What's the time? Can you tell me? Can you tell me what's the time? Yes, it's half past 8. What about this one here? What's the time? It's 5:30. Yes. Next one. What's the time? Anyone? Anyone? Hurry up, tell me, what's the time? It's 11:30. Yes, it's 11:30. I bet you say that correctly, didn't you? Good job. Okay, what's the time? Yes, it's 9:30. It's 9:30. What's the time? It's 10:30. What's the time? It's 10:30. Good job, children. Very, very good. Okay, now, what's the time? Remember the long hand is at 6, meaning it's 12:30 something. So look at the short hand. It's slightly past 12. So it's 12:30. What's the time? It's 12:30. Good job. So we're gonna listen to the song again. Alright? Make sure you sing along.
What's the new surprise? Shapes in every size. Parts will come together to a new toy and a new adventure.
The clock is ticking, tick-tock. What's the time, Mr. Clock? The clock is ticking, tick-tock. What's the time, Mr. Clock? 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock, 4 o'clock, 5 o'clock, 6 o'clock. What's the time? The clock is ticking, tick-tock. What's the time, Mr. Clock? The clock is ticking, tick-tock. What's the time, Mr. Clock? 7 o'clock, 8 o'clock, 9 o'clock, 10 o'clock, 11 o'clock, 12 o'clock. What's the time, Mr. Clock?
Alright, that's all for the song.
So, what do you say? You want to be the first to get our videos? Click here to subscribe. And if you
Alright, so that's all for today's lesson. Remember to complete the task that I've given, the worksheet that I've given to you. Alright, see you next lesson. Bye.